lost my place there. She was a senior design manager for the Vanguard Group, where she directed all of the marketing for Vanguard's largest institutional clients. In addition to her consulting work, Orly is a respected public speaker and teacher. She has taught at UPenn and lectured at the Wharton School. She's an adjunct professor at Irvin Can Hall School of Business and St. Joe's University. She has been a lead speaker and moderator at the Social Venture Institute, which happened in 2005, where she was a moderator there. And she conducted a great workshop called Selling Your Brand, The Power of Messaging. Orly has served as a keynote speaker for Toll Brothers at their national conference, and in 2012 she led a brand workshop at the Community College of Philadelphia. So clearly Orly has done a lot. She's also a sustainability fellow at the Pennsylvania University, where she's currently completing a strategic design MBA, the first of its kind on the East Coast. So Orly's work and her articles has appeared in different business publications such as the Philadelphia Business Journal, and has been featured in a large newspaper in Israel as well. Orly grew up in Switzerland and is bilingual in French and English. So she's way overqualified to be doing this master class for us today. Thank you again so much, Orly, for joining us.
Thank you, Jamila. So if it's all right with you, I thought I would just take the listeners through this presentation that I did actually for SVI. I think you may have actually sat in on this, because I think it's a great way to introduce people to messaging and also to the whole idea of what is brand. I mean, we all know what brand is. We certainly know the words. We hear it every day, but I think a lot of us may have some misconceptions about what brand really is. Often what people talk about when they talk about brand is really identity, which is actually not brand. It's a part of brand, but it isn't the whole story. So hopefully that'll be one piece that you'll take away today. So let me get started. So let's look at, first of all, let's look at the kind of the context. Our context is, and this is something that I always find it amazing whenever I look at the statistic. So, in the 50, 60 years ago, you think about this, right? So each of us saw more ads in 1 year, that 50 years ago saw an entire lifetime. So you think about how overwhelmed everyone is, and this has a lot to do with that. That's why we have such a hard time remembering things. Which brings me to another stat, which actually comes from a Business Week article, and this is back in 2004. So my guess is that number is probably higher, but this is the number of messages we're getting on a daily basis. I mean, and to put it in context, 30 years ago, that number was 1,500. So we've gone from 1,500 messages a day to 12,000 messages a day. And we wonder why we're always feeling so overwhelmed. I would suggest that maybe that has something to do with it. So that brings us to brand. And this is actually the best, I would say this is probably the best explanation I've seen. It comes from Electronic Ink, actually, a Philadelphia company. One of their principals said this to me. And if you think about it, it's really about some of the experiences. So you think about branding, it's not something that happens once. It's not a one-and-done experience. It's something that happens over time. And the reason why it's so complicated and complex and why it's so difficult to manage a brand is because it's out there on all these channels over many years. If you're successful, it could be as 100 years. And people are experiencing this at all points of contact. So that means, the person who answers your phone is part of your brand. The customer service relationship is part of your brand. Your store is part of your brand. Everything that you can think of is really part of brand. So you start to see really how complex a brand really is and why it takes such a long time to build and why it takes so long to build brand awareness and brand loyalty. And very important aspect of this, and this is something that a lot of companies forget, is that a brand is not what you say it is, it's what they say it is. They, of course, are your customers. So this gets us directly into the messaging piece, which is where I'm going to spend a little bit more time. But I found this graphic, I thought this was really great, because what most companies do is they talk about themselves, right? They talk about what is top of mind for them. but at the other end of that conversation is your potential customer, and they're not listening. So where you want to be is that space in between called relevance, and that really is what all of us as business people want to be. We all want to be in that slice where what we're saying, what we're doing is relevant to our potential and current customers. So that brings us to positioning, which is another kind of buzzword that I think is out there right now. So what is positioning? It's really where you are in a customer's mind. Remember, it's all about the customer, and positioning is very important because if you can't get to that quickly, remember those 12,000 daily messages, they're not going to remember you. And if you can't remember me, you can't find me. If you can't find me, you can't buy me. And if you can't buy me, you're not going to remember me or refer me. So those are all very important aspects of brand. So in order to be successful in positioning, you want to focus on one point of difference. One of the key things that I've discovered over the years I've been doing this is that it's very easy to talk a lot and to say a lot of things. It is incredibly difficult to say one thing. The less words you say, the more difficult it is. But on the plus side, the less words you say, the more likely you are to be remembered. So let's take a look at an example. FedEx, I think, is a brand we're all familiar with. They were founded in 1971. I think we're all familiar with their story. I don't know, Jamila, if you're familiar with the story that they started as a Wharton, it was a project at Wharton, and they got a C in the class, actually.
Oh, wow.
Right? It's a great story, right? It's a Philadelphia story, so I like using it. But what's interesting about it is, right, they got a C because they were so ahead of their time that the response by the professor was, well, who's ever going to need an overnight service?
Oh, wow.
So, right. So clearly, you know, part of being a visionary is you have to be willing to get C's and not be heard in the beginning and just go forward anyway, which is, of course, what they did and have become incredibly successful. So what their one point of difference is guaranteed overnight delivery. And that line has been the same line back when they were just delivering in the U.S. Now today they deliver in over 220 countries. And basically, they're still doing the same thing. Now, from a messaging standpoint, what's interesting is that today what they talk about, this is directly off their website, is that they move the global economy, which is another way of saying guaranteed overnight delivery. But it's said in a way that someone in the context of today understands that. And that's meaningful. Back to relevance, this is much more relevant than saying guaranteed overnight delivery. And then their tagline, which, by the way, positioning, the reason why positioning is so important is because positioning is the first step to developing a truly meaningful and relevant tagline. So this has been their tagline also almost from the beginning, because really, what else is it that they do, right? That they've never really veered off of that. So now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, I'm going to give you three messaging do's and don'ts. And we're going to start with this one. This is from digiday.com. It's the blog. And what I found, so I picked the top three that I thought were really the most interesting and I think the most relevant to our audience. Brands need a point of view. That's clearly important because it can't just be, oh, here's a bunch of stuff, you know. You don't want to be wishy-washy. You want to really have a point of view, because it's very difficult when you're trying to develop web content to do that without a strong point of view. So let's look at an example. Ralph Lauren, this, by the way, is a picture of his house. So he also lives the brand. Not only does he sell these products, he lives it. So here's somebody who really, truly is imbued with his brand and the whole idea of what he really stands for. So the second one is to focus on the why, not the what. I know, Jamila, we've talked about Simon Sinek and his golden circle, which is this whole idea of, he's quantified the whole idea of how people buy. And what it turns out that people don't buy what you sell, they buy why you sell it. And that's a really revolutionary thought that I think it's really changed the way that I work with my clients, because if you can't define why you're doing it, you're not going to be successful, because the why is how you connect with your clients and with your customers. So let's look at an example here. So here's Starbucks, right? They don't talk about coffee. They never talk about coffee. What they talk about is that they build communities. And this, again, is directly off their website. And they are just masters at knowing how to market around this idea, because everything about their brand has to do with how do we build communities. So that's why the seating is the way it is. You know, they're not McDonald's, right? Because McDonald's, by the way, I don't know if you know this, but the original McDonald's, which was the colors were red and yellow, and that was purposefully done because when you are around red and yellow, what you want to do is leave as quickly as possible.
Oh, wow.
Right? So because the whole idea was to get people in and out as quickly as possible. If you think about it, can you think of a single high expensive restaurant that ever has a color scheme of red and yellow?
No.
Of course not, because they want you to stay as long as possible and order more stuff. Right? But so again, it's an interesting thought with Starbucks is their whole environment is the antithesis of Starbucks. I mean of McDonald's, sorry. Because what they do is they've created a way that, you know, that's why they give you, they offer free Wi-Fi. That's why they have the type of music, which of course all of those things have then created their own brand extensions. So they sell the music, they sell the cups, they sell the food, as well as, you know, all the artwork is for sale too. So they're just really masterful at creating a sense of it's a meeting place, but it's also a wonderful sales, it's kind of a sales pitch, right? It's very much like, you know, this idea that you're in the space, and while you're in it, you're having a good experience, and so you want to recreate it elsewhere. It's just a really, really well crafted, and they really stick to that, and they do a very good job of it. So the last one I want to talk about is this idea that you don't always want to focus on you. Back to what I was saying earlier about it's what they say, not what you say. You really want to make sure that you're talking about things that matter to your customers. So let's look at a great example. Social companies are very big right now, and Patagonia is one of the first. They did an entire ad campaign about not buying their jackets, because they were looking at consumerism, and so they were doing this whole idea, which in fact what it ends up saying is, if you're only going to buy one, buy our jacket, right? So I mean, it's just but it's really well crafted, and I would definitely encourage you guys to go and take a look at their site and look at this campaign in particular. It's very well done, and of course they can do that because we believe them. You know, we believe Patagonia because they've shown themselves to be very socially responsible. Both, I mean, they were one of the first to look at the supply chain. They're very involved with their communities. They're incredibly good to their people. In fact, I don't know if you know this, that they had a fire and the whole corporate, I think it was the corporate, one of their, either their corporate office or it was their manufacturing space burned down, and instead of laying people off, the president of Patagonia didn't take a salary for a year. So what I'm going to end with here is just to give you an example of one of my projects, just to kind of tie it all together, to show you kind of how we go from this idea of vision to positioning to messaging and to identity, which really those are the key aspects of establishing a brand. So Jeff Flake is summer camp, and they've been around since the 1950s. And it's interesting because I worked with them for about 3 months, worked with their executive team, and one of the things that kept coming up over and over again is their commitment and their genuine commitment to turning out better people. That their idea is that camp is the opportunity to take a child and teach the child the things that the child needs to become a better person, which is, you know, a very lofty goal. But as it turns out, you know, that a lot of summer camps believe that, and they were very hesitant to kind of use that in their marketing. But, you know, what I said to them is, but this is something very meaningful to the people who come out of your camps, and we know this because they have literally hundreds of letters from former campers who tell them that Jeff Flake has made them better people and better parents. So this is the first step, which was to get a kind of a deep dive of, you know, why people come here. So this comes out of a quantitative analysis that I did where I sent out, it was an online questionnaire. More than 100 families responded. And as you can see, fun is the #1 thing. Now, what's really interesting is you also see the word dirty, spirited, active, energetic. These are all things that people think about when they think of Jeff Lake Camp. Now, here's the piece that I found really fascinating with this is, and one of the reasons why I like this process so much is it really gets right down to what do your customers believe, which is something that most of us who run companies don't really take the time to ask them in a way that, where they can really tell us why do they buy us, because knowing that helps us understand how to market. Because if you understand that fun is the #1 thing, that shifts the way you think about your marketing. So here's the interesting part. For over 50 years, let's see, I worked with them in 2008, so 2010, around that time, and from the 1950s on, they had always been marketing around their lake. They happen to have a lake that's 50 acres, so it's a huge lake. It's a huge part of the daily excitement of being at Jeff Lake. So here's the interesting part. When I ask people to name the top 5 reasons why they send their kids there, do you know how many people said the lake? This is out of 100 people. Any want to guess how many people mentioned the lake?
Maybe about 30%?
2 people.
Oh.
2, in fact, it's not on this list at all. If you look at, because this is a bubble, right? This is one of those bubble graphics that take all the words, right, and create one graphic. It's not even on there because that's how unimportant. I think it might be somewhere in the really, really tiny writing. So here for all these years, they had been marketing around the wrong things, right? It's back to this idea of messaging. So that brings us to the vision statement. And this was actually, the vision statement is always a very meaningful thing for me because it's really kind of where the rubber meets the road. And what I loved about it is it was so authentic, when they said it, that it really, it was just wonderful, right? So this idea of to make better adults and better world, which I mentioned before. But where that brings us is to positioning. So how are you different than all these other camps, right? And this is, by the way, a summer day camp, which is not to be confused with an overnight camp. So apparently there are a lot of levels of summer camps out there, which is something I didn't know until I started working with them. So this is the focus, this is the one point of difference. It's the only, and they can say this because it's true, the only summer day camp where small kids do big things. I think this is probably one of the most powerful statements I've ever heard from a client, and this came, by the way, from their swim instructor, because she at one point said, oh yeah, it's the place, small kids do big things here. And I said, oh, that's pretty terrific, and it turns out that their swim program they're known for their swim program, and that's really where the lake comes in, right, because everything is around water, but that's not why people go there. They send their child there because their child has fun doing those things, which is a very important point of difference, to realize that you don't focus on the what, you focus on the why. So the what is the lake, but the why is that small kids do big things here. So that brings us to messaging, and again, changing their messaging away from the lake and also away from responding, which they had been in kind of a responding mode because they had lost their why. They had lost the reason what had made them such a great place to begin with. So kind of reorienting them back to their original purpose, with this original vision of creating better people, made the messaging really a lot easier to get to. So now when they talk to potential campers, and of course they're talking to families, the first thing they say is our kids have fun here, because they know that's the #1 reason why people send their kids here. The other thing is that most of our staff is a former camper. Why that's important is because it shows longevity, and if your staff are former campers, that says a lot about the kind of camp that you run. In fact, the director met his wife there, and their kids went there. So it's not unusual to have 2 or 3 generations of the same family who come here. And now they have, the family, when they grow up, often they meet their spouse there, and then they send their kids here. So And that piece, that kind of longevity piece, and also it goes directly to the third piece of messaging, which is we're your child's second family. And they really live that. So this is something else I want to really point out, is that it isn't just words that they say. They really, truly live that, which is why having messaging that's authentic is so important, because if it feels true, it is true, and if you're saying it from that place, people will respond, because it isn't just a line like, you know, we have excellent customer service. You know, whoever says they have bad customer service, you know, but it doesn't mean anything because everyone can say that. But what they are saying is something that only they can say. And the reason they can say that we're your child's second family is because no matter who you get on the phone, they know your child, they know everything about your child, they know your family, and they know exactly where your child is at that moment, which is actually another piece of messaging which they talk a lot about. When we did a whole exercise on what mattered to their customers, to their families, they want to know that their child is safe. So if I call and you know my child, I already feel relieved. So that's a very important aspect of that experience, because it isn't just the camper who's having the experience, it's also the family. So that brings us to brand identity, and the reason I end there is because obviously there's way more than this, but the reason I'm going to stop here is because brand identity is the face of your business. It's
Orly,
something that
before you go on to brand identity, just a couple of questions for you. One is so it looks like in the case of the camp, they have two focal messages. One about being the child's second family, and the other is where your kids do big things. When you have more than one message like that, how do you utilize the two messages?
Gotcha. Well, first of all, let me clarify. The small kids do big things is not their message, that's their positioning. That's kind of the flag that they put in the sand and they say this is where we live. That's very different from, and again, you've also have to remember that you have internal messaging and external messaging. So when you say that we're the place where the small kids do big things, they're only going to hire people who really believe that. That goes to employer brand, that goes to retention and recruitment. The messaging about our kids have fun here and our staff, you know, most of our staff is a former camper, we're your child's second family, that's the kind of thing they talk about when parents come into an open house. So I just want to clarify that. So you have kind of the umbrella, which is so when we first talk about Jeff Flake Camp, we say, you know what, Jeff Flake, we're the place where small kids do big things. And then we talk about the messaging, which is they have fun here, you know, we're your child's second family, and you know, we talk about also the types of, then what they do is they talk about activities. And activities, by the way, that's the what, that always comes last. Does that answer your question, Jamila?
Yes, and then my other question was around the small kids do big things seems like a great tagline or messaging, you know, going outward and put, you know, in terms of positioning the company.
Yes, you're right. I'm sorry. It is a tagline in some respect, but I want to clarify this because there is some overlap a little bit there, but it's really how you know what, here's the way to think about this. The place where small kids do big things, that's their elevator pitch. But their tagline you'll see at the end, and I'll get to that in a minute. But it's a bigger thing than a tagline. The tagline, you know, that's really speaking to a specific aspect about what they do. And again, when we started looking at brand identity, you know, you're looking at the name, you're looking at how you talk about yourself, you're looking at a lot of different aspects of it. So it's not that you can't use it that way, but I want to just say that it's bigger than a tagline. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I definitely get it, that it's bigger than the tagline, but I'm curious about, it feels warm and fuzzy, but it also seems like an ambiguous phrase. So, and maybe that's intentional, but I'm guessing in terms of companies trying to figure out their messages, to say, you know, kids do big things, immediately I think, well, what does that really mean? That they do big things.
And you know what? You are exactly correct, and that's the beauty of it. It it prompts people to ask you questions because they want to know more. And that's your opportunity to start talking about all the great things that this camp is known for. They have one of the top swim programs in the area. They are at the top of they have all these sports that they're very competitive, and they are like top rated. Their instructors are always well regarded. There's a lot of components to this. I also wanted to mention one other thing, Jamila, is that you have to remember you are not their customer. And this is a hard thing, I think, for all of us to realize that we are not always the people that someone is speaking to. And what I've often found is that if something doesn't resonate with me, it's because I'm not the end user.
But it does resonate with me. I have 5 nieces and nephews. I like the idea that small kids could do big things, but like I said, I would be curious about, well, what are those big things? So that's what I'm saying.
Exactly.
I'm not sure if it's intentional or just ambiguous.
But you don't, okay, so let me try to back up here a little bit. First of all, yes, I know, I can understand that it resonates with you, but you've never sent a child to camp, right? You don't have children, right?
Well, I've sent my nieces and nephew to camp.
Yeah, but they're not your kids. So you're not the person who went and checked out all the camps to decide which one to send them to, right?
No, I was.
Oh, you were, okay. Okay, that's fine. So the other
I'm
thing
a super auntie.
Great, that's great. So here's the thing. You know, I think what we often mistake this idea of clarity with resonance. So the clarity happens once I ask questions. Now we're having a conversation.
Okay, that's great.
Right? So, because what we forget is, you know, and our website is a conversation starter also. We'll talk a little bit about that when I look at the 3 that you sent me. We often forget that we're not talking to ourselves. We're talking to a potential end user of our product or service.
Gotcha. Okay.
So should I keep going? Did you have another question?
No, that was great. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. Alrighty, so back to brand identity, the face of your business, as I said, and most people don't think of it that way. They come up with a name that's, you know, ambiguous, or just they liked it that day or whatever. They don't really do the research to say, well, gee, you know, does this make sense? I could spend an hour just talking about brand identity, but we don't have time for that. So I'm just going to show you what we ended up doing for Jeff Lake. So this is what they had before. Now you notice that the lake is the focal point of the identity, right?
Yes.
And you also notice it used to be called Jefferson Lake's Day Camp, but of course everybody calls it Jeff Lake. So having both the way people spoke about it and the original name together made it very confusing. By the way, when I ran the quantitative research, the online survey, one of the questions I asked is, how do you feel about the logo? And do you know what people said? They actually said, what logo? Now, remember, they've been around since the 1950s, and people didn't even know they had a logo. So I think that kind of says it all right there. And you'll notice that the A, there's the little sailboat, and it's all about water, right? And nobody remembered it, again, because that's not the reason why they send their kids there. So this is the new logo. And the reason it has a child, first of all, that child is coming from, I looked at dozens of photographs of kids having a great time at their camp. And one of the, you know, if you think about small kids doing big things here, and it's also, and I haven't gone into all the other parts of the messaging, but there's also this whole idea that this is a place that's, you know, goes back to the original idea of what summer camp was. It's not micromanaged. It's also not a place for 3-year-olds, and this goes directly to how they were kind of reacting to the marketplace. And I'll just speak very quickly about that because it's an important point when you're thinking about how to brand your business. What happened was, because they had lost their why, they found themselves in a constantly changing environment. People now are sending their 2-year-olds to day camp. That was not the case in the 1950s. Because moms didn't work, and so there was always somebody at home. Now, you know, kids younger and younger are going to camp. So what was happening is they were trying to react to a change in culture by saying, yeah, we take basically we take care of kids from age 4 to 15. Well, that can't possibly be true because if you're going to go out, if you're going to really truly market successfully, you have to figure out really where your sweet spot is. And what it turned, and this again from all the research and the interviews that I did with their team, what we all realized is that their true target market is age 9 to 11, or maybe 8 to 11. That demographic, and the reason is because after 11, if you haven't come to this camp, you're not going to come here, because by that point, kids have already decided where they're going. And I know this from having kids who, you know, they in fact, you know, once they picked a place, that's it. They didn't want to hear about any other camps, right? Because they'd already made their friends, they'd already kind of made their mark there. Anything younger, now all of a sudden, you're because you have a 50-acre lake, the first thing parents are going to ask if they have a 4-year-old is it safe? So when I started working with them, they were literally had already started and had drawings to create kind of a mini camp within the camp, which would have cost them thousands and thousands of dollars to do. When now, instead, now that they're the place where small kids do big things, where it's also the place where it's all about fun and activity, and because they speak to families with often more than one child, the 4-year-old can say, when I get to be 6, I'm going to go to Jeff Lake. Creates a whole different dynamic around the way they sell. And they are now, by the way, busier than ever. They have a wait list. They are now booked in February, which when I spoke to them, they were literally struggling to get people to come in. Like by June, they still weren't full. And you know, this is an expensive camp. It's not an inexpensive purchase. You know, as you know from, you know, if you've looked at summer camps, they're expensive. But it's really incredible because it's now everyone is really enthusiastic because they truly believe and they see and they understand and they are part of this whole idea that this is where, you know, the small child can say, wow, this is where I'm going to go when I'm 6. So and the reason that this is and this is one of the tagline here is because the first thing you learn is the camp song, and that's what this when you see this, that's they spell out the name of the camp. So that's where that comes from. So that concludes this. Do you have any questions before I move on to the other websites?
Doesn't look like it. If anyone has a question, feel free to type your question into the question box so that we can make sure your question gets answered. So I think for now, Orly, let's keep going, and then folks will type their questions as they come in.
That's great. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch screens, and I'm going to start with, so we're going to look at 3 different types of brands. This is the personal brand, Janla Vincent, and then we're going to look at 2 consumer brands. So let's start with her. I found her very interesting. I did a little bit of a deep dive into her website, but we're only, because we don't have the time, I'm only going to focus on the homepage. Now, I want you to look at a couple things. And, you know, I wasn't going to talk about color, Jamila, but with her site, color is such a big part of it that I literally couldn't help I had to look at it. Now, you'll notice the main colors here are brown and gold. And interestingly enough, those are the colors she's wearing in this dress. You guys see that? Right? Now, here's what's interesting. Yellow and gold have nothing to do with the, and I do a lot of research on color. If you look at her text, the headline here is Welcome Home, right? And it's all about prayers and affirmations and about helping people evolve and transformation. But brown and gold are the colors of success and wealth. They are not the colors of transformation. So what I found really interesting is because both colors are about material wealth and success, which is really who she is, right? I mean, she's been on Oprah. She's guest hosted with Oprah. She has her own show. She's written 15 books. 5 of her books were on the New York Times bestseller list. She has more than a million followers on Facebook and more than 500,000 on Twitter. So what I found really interesting is if she truly wanted to say that I'm about transformation and I'm about love and affirmations, then the colors really should be pink and magenta, because pink is the color of unconditional love. And magenta is the color of universal harmony and emotional balance. So I thought that was really interesting. I looked at that and I thought, wow, you know, when I said originally about, you know, how we tend to talk about ourselves, this is really about her. Now, of course, it is a personal brand, so I get that. But I really wonder about, you know, what it might look like if we landed on her page, our homepage, and instead of seeing all this brown and gold, what if we saw a white site and it just had hints of pink and magenta? How differently we would respond to that. Because pink is also a very calming color. In fact, a little known fact here that prisons have actually painted rooms in pink and found that when they put inmates in a pink room, they calm down. So just very interesting little tidbit about color. I thought that was kind of an interesting way to talk about that. So should I go on to the next one, or do you have any questions about her site? Because I want to make sure we leave enough time for questions.
No, I didn't have any. I guess if there was one thing that you would say that there's none in the chat box. If there's one thing that you would say that is done well here that people should look at emulating.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Sorry. I mean, I think it is done well. I mean, it definitely represents her as an expert in what she does. I mean, you land on here and you know this is somebody who knows what she's talking about because it's very strong. It's very strong, and I think her images, you know, of herself there, I think are wonderful images. I mean, they're full of life, and it clearly shows someone who lives what she says. So I think she's done a great job with that, and I think in terms of, you know, when you have, and she's definitely doing a good job on social media. I like the fact that she says connect with Yanla because, you know, part of her message is, you know, that she's available to you. That's why her YouTube videos, actually, she does a daily, kind of a daily conversation with her. It's interesting, too. I did want to mention one other thing, which I found really interesting. I didn't find it on this site, but on her social media sites, she talks about how she fixes things, and that what people ask her is, can you fix my life? That's what people ask her, which I thought was very interesting because it doesn't say that here. But that's throughout social media. That's in fact she has, you know, she talks about her fix-it conversations. And also I think, you know, having her books. I mean, this is clearly, I think if you want to really promote yourself as a personal brand and promote your expertise, I think she's doing a good job of that.
Okay, great. Leanne asked a question about the color research. She said if she wanted to do some color research, could you give her a resource for where she could do that, or is there a book or a reference?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. There's actually a site, empoweryourselfwithcolorpsychology.com.
Oh, wow.
And I'd be happy to send that to you. Yeah, it's fabulous. I actually, you know, I'm always looking at sites. I mean, there's tons. I mean, there's literally dozens of sites that talk about the meaning of color. But I like this one because it also talks about different hues of colors. So like violet is different than purple, because purple is the color of royalty, but violet is the color of, you know, of transformance, of transcendence, which is a lot different, right? So I like that she does that. And then she also talks about the difference between white and black, which I thought was really interesting. The black is mysterious, white is the color of purity. Yeah, so I would recommend that. I think that's a great place to get some insight on color.
Okay, great. I posted that in the chat for everybody.
Great, great. So let me go on to, so the next one I want to look at is a consumer brand, but it's an educational brand. So this is Food 52. Now, I did not have time to really dig into where the name came from. I thought that was kind of interesting. I'm sure it has some meaning for someone somewhere, but I would have loved to have known where that came from.
I actually just found that out, Orly, which is
great. Yeah, what is it?
It's food 52 weeks a year, so it's the idea of food year round, which I thought was like secretly brilliant once I found out what it was.
You know what? Thank you so much for that, because I'll tell you something. I love names that are secretly brilliant, because you know, when you have a name like that, the first thing you say to yourself, well, you know, why did they do that? Which makes us curious, which of course is one of our best qualities as humans, right? We're all curious human beings. So the more you are questioning things like that, the more you say, wow, this is really interesting. And then when you get the answer, you tell everybody, like we're doing right now. I love that. Thank you. So here's something that they're doing very well. Boy, if you love food, this is the place for you. Right? So then you look at the header panel, which is the big panel in the beginning here. So, and then it immediately brings you into food, right? And it talks about specific things. One of the things I love this one, which is how to make strawberry syrup from scratch. I clicked on that just so you could see it, but it gives you the ingredients of how to do that. But here's what's really cool about this. They don't talk about making it from scratch for no reason. They do it because it's back to the story piece. Remember where I talked about a story at the very beginning of our conversation? It's recreate your favorite drink from childhood. I love that. I think that instantly brings me to that place of being, and I remember like taking syrups and mixing them with things, right? So I thought that was just so brilliant that they do it that way. And it's how the whole site is sort of set up that way. Kitchen Meet Italy, I think that's wonderful. Now, the one thing I will say, like, so they have this cook, read, and shop. What I would have suggested doing is to do cook, read, and shop as links, and then let me go there instead of having all of this on here. I think it's a lot for somebody to look at. I think, Jamila, I know we've talked about this above and below the fold, which comes from newspaper language, that you want all the important information to be above the fold and the secondary information to be below the fold. So I wish that they had, and I know, of course, different websites do it differently, but I think if you're right here and this is what you see, I think this is fabulous. Then what happens is when you go below and you start to look, now all of a sudden it's sign up for our newsletter, you know, we're on the App Store. By the way, they have quite a following. They have 212,000 plus Facebook likes, I guess. They have 113,000 followers. So clearly not as big as the personal brand example, but you know, pretty good, I think. And then they also have, you know, they're on Google, they're on Instagram, Pinterest. So it was also interesting to see what social media people are using. Now you'll notice they're not on LinkedIn, and I wanted to point that out because none of the brands that you send me are on LinkedIn, and that's because LinkedIn is not for consumers. It's for people like me who are consultants, who can post what they're up to and what they're doing. But it's not a place really because, you know, you can't like people on LinkedIn, but you can certainly like these recipes, which is, of course, how they know where to go next. So they're using also social media as a way to get a pulse on their consumers. So I thought that was very interesting. Shall I go to the next one, or should I talk more about this? Because we have one more.
Yeah, sure. Let's go to the next one.
Okay.
Unless there's anything else that's burning from Food 52.
Yeah. And you know, I'm happy to go back to that, but like I said, I want to leave a few minutes for questions. So Birchbox, I thought this was a wonderful site. For what they're doing, I think it's very, very well done in terms of understanding who their customer is. So clearly they're going after the 25 to 40 demographic. That's clear. Because all the people on here, there's nobody over probably 35, I would say. And also open for handsome and open for beautiful, which I think is such a great way to talk to. This is what they have down below. Sorry, they had beautiful and handsome, but then they also had open for new favorites. But the way they separate men and women is women are beautiful and men are handsome. And I think having a way to kind of quickly get to that, I thought was wonderful. So let's see, there was something else I wanted to mention. There are a couple of things that came to mind. Yeah, so right, so they have open for beautiful, open for handsome, and they clearly separate men and women, and they have two types of products for men and women. And the interesting thing I think about this is the way they personalize what's in the box. And I think that's really what that's their why, is that they absolutely get who you are as your own brand, and then they come back to you and they give you products that only you would want. And if you watch their video on YouTube, which is actually kind of interesting, it's by the founders, And they talk about the fact, and this of course, totally resonated with me because they talk about how we're so overwhelmed by all the products, especially in the beauty aid category, the grooming products. I mean, there are literally thousands of products. And I know all of us have had this experience. You know, you go to the, for all of us women who've gone to the makeup counter and, you know, you get so overwhelmed and you end up buying 10 things that you're never going to use again. And this is a way to kind of cut through that and give us the things we actually want and the things we can actually use. So I think that is a really great way to do that. By the way, they have over 1 million followers on Facebook, which is very impressive. I was speaking to a client recently, and she said, you know, if you have less than 10,000, really, you probably shouldn't even be on Facebook because either you're not working it hard enough or your product really doesn't suit itself to Facebook. Because Facebook is a place where the numbers really speak, and so having 100,000 and up is when you start to become an influencer. So I just kind of want to put that out there. It's not an easy thing to get that many followers, and 1 million, that's a lot of people. So if I were looking at this strictly from, do I want to do this? And if I'm their demographic, let's say I'm a 29-year-old who, you know, just got her first really impressive job, and I don't have time to shop for all this stuff, and I see that they have 1 million followers, I'm already on it, right? Because it also gives you a place to like, and then you see your friends have liked it. So I think with Birchbox, I think they're doing a really amazing job of tapping into the power of social media. So I use them because I really wanted to speak to that particular thing. The other thing that they're doing on Tumblr, which I thought was really interesting, is they're looking at their trending articles. And they found, there's a piece that I thought was really pretty interesting about Nordstrom. I don't know if you know this. I didn't know this until I saw this. That Nordstrom's catalog now features women with disabilities. They're the first, as far as I know, they're the first department store to ever do that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. So the article is actually very interesting. So I would encourage people to go look at that. But you know what that made me want to do is to go shop at Nordstrom's. Right? Because if they're that sensitive to people with disabilities. Now, interestingly enough, you know, I don't know if you know this, but of course, Nordstrom's, you know, that their whole positioning is customer service, and they live and breathe customer service, which is why I think they've actually had stories of people who've returned tires at Nordstrom's and gotten their money back. They don't sell tires.
Yes.
They've actually paid for the dry cleaning of people who shopped at their store. You know, I mean, crazy stuff like that. So I thought that was really interesting that that also, and last point I'm going to make about social media, which I think is a really important one for people to consider. It isn't just what you talk about, it's who you align yourself with. And what you want to look at are brands that are aligned with your vision, that just by trending them, just by talking about them, says something about you. And it will help you connect with the kinds of customers who really get that. And I think it would elevate your own brand by doing that as well.
That's great, Orly. So if anyone has a question, you can now raise your hand using your menu box to raise your hand, and I can unmute you to ask your question live if you have a question. But so I'll give you a second now to raise your hand if you have a question for Orly. And Orly, I'd just like to ask you before we go to any attendee questions, in terms of the, you know, sort of the framework that you set for us and looking through these different site examples of, you know, personal brands versus consumer brands, what are, if you had to, you know, sort of drill down to a couple of key actions that people should take around refining their message generally, but then if you could also just speak to the website piece of it, what should we be doing there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I started this when I was going through my presentation. It starts with your story. So the first thing you need to do is you need to figure out what your story is. And then the second thing you need to figure out is how to simplify your story so you can say it in 1 or 2 sentences. Because that really is how you're going to do the work to get to that positioning piece that helps you with that elevator pitch. So because you know, a lot of people don't understand the purpose of an elevator pitch is not for you to start to tell your whole story. The purpose of an elevator pitch is to say your 1 or 2 sentences and then read the response. And if there's no response, you stop talking. You don't keep going, because if you haven't hooked them with those first 2 sentences, they're not going to care about your story. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. The other thing is, don't be afraid to use your network to help you kind of uncover what that story is. So what I would suggest is that those of you who are just starting to do that, write, a whole paragraph maybe, or however much, unfortunately, like I said, it's very easy to write a lot, right? The hard part is to get it down to 1 or 2 sentences. Then send that paragraph out to everyone in your network, and I don't mean your friends and family because they're too biased. I'm talking about your professional network. Have them look at the paragraph and then say to you, have them edit it, and then get back the edits, and then put together, with fresh eyes, you're kind of looking at how they're viewing you. It's going to be very helpful, and it's a great exercise to kind of see how people perceive you, because that's giving you also kind of a handle on, maybe how you're being perceived, and also how you may want to be perceived, which is even more important. And then, the other piece of that is also to be able to come up with 3 to 5 words that sum up your brand. And you would ask me to connect that to the website. So what I do, this is an exercise that I actually do with my clients. I have them write 3 to 5 words. I have them pick the top one. The top one. Then we go on their homepage, and I say, where is that word here? And often the word is not there. Often the website, the homepage, is saying something completely different, and none of the words are actually here. So that's a great exercise to be able to see if, in fact, you're speaking from that place of authenticity, and if you're not seeing that connection. And I would do the same thing here. I would ask your network for that and get their response. Ask 5 people in your professional network to write down the 5 words that come up for them when they look at your homepage. I think that would be a great exercise. And then the last thing is, I would also take the time, either you or have someone interview your clients so you can really get to what's the reason why they work with you. Because I think knowing that, it's sort of like it's a kind of a 360 loop. So you ask people why they work with you, you find out what that is, and you turn around and you give them back the messaging that speaks to that, and it reinforces why they work with you. So I think those are pretty key things, I would say, and they're easy things, I think, for you to do. And that would be those would be my recommendations.
Okay, and then just to solidify what you said about the 2-sentence story,
yeah.
From all of the different brands that we looked at today, could you just give us 2 sentences from any of these brands that would
right.
be a perfect example for folks that
Well, Food 52 already does that, helping people become better, smarter, happier cooks. I think they've already done it. And they're giving us, basically the reason to believe, which I think is great. I think they're doing a really good job with that. Birchbox, I think they're because they're talking to a younger demographic, I don't think it's so much about the story as it is about, making them look good, which is really what they're doing. Open for Beautiful just basically says what we're going to send you is going to make you beautiful. So I think that's what they're doing, and I think they understand that demographic really well. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens as the founders get older and they find their demographic may be older too. They may want to change that.
That's great, Orly. So last call for questions. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand now or post it in the chat box. Definitely want to make sure that you don't leave having anything unanswered. So I'll just give people a second to do that if there's any last questions. But Orly, can you just let people know if they are interested in learning more about the work that you do or interested in working with you to have their brands developed, how should they best reach you and get in touch with you?
Right, so they can certainly email me at orly@zeewy.com, zeewy.com, or they can just call me, 610-513-2363, and I'd be happy to talk to them. Okay,
great. So it doesn't look like we got, you were so thorough, Orly, there. You either already answered everything or everyone's scared to death to put their...
No, you know what, it's either that or people are so overwhelmed that it's going to take them a week to digest what I said.
Well, at least they now know how to get in touch with you next week. to get their questions answered. So thank you again so much, Orly, for doing this. And
no problem.
if you are interested in learning more about the community for women entrepreneurs at Soul Purpose Company, then visit our website at soulpurposecompany.com. Thanks again, Orly. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.